Hate rhetoric from politicians, religious leaders, and media outlets is at the root of the attacks like at Club Q, and it needs to stop now. Rhetoric that makes people less than for being different. Rhetoric that threatens to silence what sports we can play, what bathrooms we can use, how we define our family, and who I can marry. We need elected leaders to demonstrate language that reflects love and understanding, not hate and fear.
Yeah, there was a Republican in the room, and that during the hearing, James Comer, who is poised to become the next chairman of this committee, he said that while Republicans condemn this horrific attack, he criticized Democrats for holding this hearing. In fact, saying that Democrats are using today's hearing to, quote, blame Republicans for this horrendous crime. Democrats pushed back. They said this was as a hearing that was designed to show that these attacks against LGBTQ individuals are not isolated, and that what happened at Club Q is a part of a larger systemic problem in American society.
There was that testimony yesterday at the House Oversight Committee on that shooting at the Club Q in Colorado that took 5 people's lives and injured 19 others. There was more testimonies, specifically in this case from one of the bartenders that was there that saw the disaster that happened, and death was just supposed to be coming his way next. Let's look at what he had to say in this devastating situation.
I was bartending that evening when the attack began. I felt more terrified than I ever have before in my life. I ran for my life that night and hid, praying and hoping the violence would end. When I stared down the barrel of that gun, I realized I stood no chance against a weapon of that power, magazine capacity, and seemingly automatic firing rate. While I prepared for my life to end in that moment, I prayed, I panicked, and I prayed some more. God must have heard my prayers because 2 brave men stopped the shooter moments before he would have inevitably found me. I saw my friend lying on the floor, bleeding out, knowing there was little to no chance of surviving that bullet wound. I had to tell him goodbye while I continued to fear for my life, not knowing if the attack was truly over. I can still hear the rapid firing of bullets today. It's a sound I may never forget. It's a sound I hope no one here or anywhere else in this country has to hear.
Multiple people that testified, of course, laid some of the blame on the rhetoric that Republicans and conservatives like to say and push their supporters to hate certain individuals that were in that particular bar that night. And they weren't too happy about those characterizations or the pushback on their rhetoric. It's really weird how that works. But if you listen to what that bartender then said, what he had to go through, how he was ready to die, but then was still hoping he wouldn't, at the last second saw his life saved, maybe you could care if you paid attention and considered him a human being. Instead, people like James Comer there, who was a Republican representative in the House, he wanted nothing to do with it. In fact, many of them there wanted to deflect that blame. Republicans on the Oversight Committee had a different villain in mind to blame for this whole thing, for not just the Club Q shooting, but for the fact that for the past 2 years, we have seen record levels of fatal violence against trans and gender non-conforming people. They pointed fingers at Democrats, you're not surprised by that. Protests against police brutality and mostly non-existent police defunding. Of course, just hit the same things every time. I'm surprised they didn't say CRT and Antifa, but there's more. Here's where James Comer came in. He noted that the alleged shooter was no stranger to law enforcement, having been arrested in 2021 after allegedly threatening to blow up a neighborhood and kill family members. The charges were later dropped and law enforcement declined to use Colorado's red flag laws to take the guns away from the suspect. Probably something he doesn't want anyway. These Republicans that are against any kind of gun control. More, there's just one glaring problem with this argument. Colorado Springs has not defunded their police department and at the behest of Black Lives Matter activists, nor is it controlled by Democrats. Both the mayor and district attorney of Colorado Springs are Republicans. And in fact, the city has actually increased police funding for 2023. Good job there. Because also we heard that Joe Biden, the president, that guy, that super lib that conservatives say so, he also said, we want to fund the police. So that lie has been debunked multiple times, but that's not gonna stop them from telling it more and more. More about that whole lie about defunding the police in general. Even beyond Colorado Springs, there's little reason to think that police defunding is shaping crime. As the Center for American Progress reported in July, Democrat-run cities spend more money on policing than Republican-run cities And of the 25 largest cities, 20 saw increases in their police budgets from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 2022. The slogan "Defund the Police" that was bandied by Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 never really took off with Democratic politicians, and certainly hasn't had much impact on actual police funding. But that isn't gonna stop the lies. Here's more folks talking about what happened and the experiences since. Here's the co-owner, Matthew Haynes from Club Q, talking about the types of messages they've received. Of course, people were murdered, but they still get this. Watch.
We have received hundreds of hate comments. I cannot read them all, but I'm going to read you a few examples. I woke up to the wonderful news that 5 mentally unstable and lesbians and 18 injured. The only thing I'm mad about is that the had courage to subdue the wonderful killer. I hope more shootings happen. Have a blessed day. The shooter was doing God's work. 5 less, not enough. Those that stopped him are the devil. All gays should die. This is hate.
Apologies for that language there, you guys. That is the messages that they're receiving after people were murdered for being who they are. So Jackson, they may want to deflect, specifically James Comer, they may want to deflect and say it's defunding the police, it's Black Lives Matter, it's those Democrat-run cities that's soft on crime, but none of it makes any sense. So he's only speaking to the people that just want to hear what he has to say.
Well, I mean, their deflection at this point is pointless, given the fact that we live in a time where pretty much everything we do is recorded in some way. It was just the other day. Actually, I was on Boss with Nina Turner yesterday when we was covering Jesse Waters, hyper focusing on, a couple $1,000s that people in the trans community can get in San Francisco. Like there's a specific program for 55 people or 120 people. And they're like, this is totally impacting the whole country, bro. And then you got people obviously like Ben Shapiro who are like hyper focused and obsessed with, same-sex marriage being wrong. Steven Crowder, the rest of Fox News. I mean, pretty much any right-wing figure you can think of, let alone the policies that are passed. So there's absolutely no questioning it. And then also when they're like, oh, the Democrats just politicized this, that would be valid if like mass shootings happened like hardly ever. But the fact that they happen so often that not only can we barely keep up with them, but often the country just stops paying attention to them because there's so much other stuff going on. We've become accustomed to them. So the old spew that you're giving just doesn't work anymore. So there's no denying it, and they know it. So that's really, that people continue to die, people continue to get massacred because gun sales. That's it.
They're answering, of course, the folks that paid them to be this way. And also, if they don't have a fearful voting bloc, then what else they have? But they've pushed it so far that it's turned violent, and they don't want to take the responsibility for that either. Now, if they flip on this and say, yo, we're not talking about murdering folks, especially folks for being who they are, their people will turn on them, and actually they won't get reelected. They'll probably get primaried by more Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Matt Gaetzes and Lauren Boeberts of the world. But they're already them. One more little piece here, graphic 7 here, you guys, because they can deny it, but stats and numbers in reality are one of those things that are really hard to push back on. In August, the Human Rights Campaign reported that the average number of tweets per day using slurs such as groomer and pedophile in relation to LGBTQ plus people surged by 406%. In the month after Florida's bill was passed. The top 500 tweets leveling false grooming allegations were viewed 72 million times. And since then, Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, reinstating thousands of accounts that were banned for hate speech and disinformation. Again, it happens every time there's an election, every time there's a midterm election. There was the fear of the Muslims coming up from the South. There was also fear of all those immigrants coming from the South with caravans. There was always issues with something that they talk about as we lead into an election, and then after whatever happens, they kind of chill on that. But the supporters who've been riled up and have nothing else to do except follow the orders of their generals, they continue to go this route because they believe it. These folks are actors. James Comer's an actor. He's trying to get more money, more position, and more power. And he's got his people running up, murdering folks, and he's applauding it by not saying where the problem is coming from. Let's go to this. Yeah, go, Jackson.
Oh, just finally, well, my last comment on this is just, conservatives, especially right now through the Republican Party in the country, they're hyper-focused on their ideal of what society and humanity is, man and woman. Man being in a superior position and, all the isms going throughout society. And people in the LGBTQ community threaten that worldview. It's really not any more complicated than that. And that's where the fear comes from. That's why they're not focused on real policy issues, because they're too busy battling the cognitive dissonance.
It's laziness. It's an easy, low-hanging fruit to attack and attach yourself to get to generate some support. It's really easy to hate. It's really, really simple to hate. And we heard Candace Owens say the other day, they give me the heebie-jeebies, and that's why we should make a policy of discrimination, because of your heebie-jeebies. Sounds like a good old American history. We've always done things.